Hi, and welcome to Steve Wraith's podcast, and big welcome to Kellie Maloney. How are you, Kellie?
I'm very well, thanks. Can't complain. Enjoying life. No stress now that I'm no longer full-time in the boxing world, thank heavens. And I'm just enjoying life.
Brilliant, great stuff. It's been a tough 15 months, I think, for everybody. Certainly, people who watch the show on a regular basis, and I guess we've all had to try and keep ourselves sane. I've kept myself sane, obviously, by doing the podcast and by getting out and walking backwards and forwards and doing exercise. How have you coped over the last 15 months?
Well, I spend most of my time now in the Algarve. I have a small freehold here where I have a selection of different animals and I look after them. I work for a charity here on a voluntary basis. So I've kept myself busy and I've been doing a lot of diversity speaking for the last few months. I've been in quite big demand, funny enough. And that's all by Zoom, so it's very easy. And I've been working with an American production company who are doing a 5-part series on my life. So I've been quite busy. I mean, I've missed like socializing and I've missed having visitors because I've not had any visitors for nearly 15, 16 months now. Yeah.
It's been tough for everybody, but that's great, keeping yourself busy. I mean, technology has been a blessing, I guess, as you say, with Zoom, etc. And managing to get onto Zoom and do talks and stuff with people, it does get you through. Obviously, boxing is probably one of the first sports that returned, and for me, I mean, we had a conversation only last week just about small hall promotions. I mean, we met in the past.
Well, I was going to interrupt you there, Steve. When you said boxing was one of the first sports to return, it only returned at elite level.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, grassroots were forgotten about, and if we're truthful, grassroots boxing is on the verge of being destroyed because you still can't really run any shows at the moment because you rely on ticket selling. I went to a show in Spain a few weeks ago from a couple of promoters who are licensed in England and Ireland, and they blew their socks on this show, and they've had to go to Spain because they couldn't afford to put a show on in the UK. I think the British Boxing Board of Control need to be looked at and being asked why they've not helped small hall promoters who are the bread and butter and lifeline of boxing and fighters that need to fight on these small hall shows so they can progress and work. If you're with the big boys, you've been okay. You've got work, you've boxed regular, they've had their TV contracts. Okay, maybe they've not earned as much as they'd like to earn, but they've been able to work and keep their fighters going. And if you ask me, I actually think the Board of Control would like to see all small hall promoters out of business.
I find that amazing. I mean, you're somebody who I've respected in the fight game for a long time, and you've been there, done it, got the T-shirt, been up against the best, managed the best, and ultimately, small hall shows. I've always had that mindset because I'm a small hall promoter coming into my 10th year now, albeit 15 months without a show. But I've always felt that the small hall was respected by the boxing board. I always felt that we were useful. We're the ones who give those young fighters an opportunity to break.
But then, Steve,
the big promoter comes in and takes the fighter on.
If you was respected and you was useful, why did they not work some way out that you could work? Why did they not help you? The Board of Control have got money. They take the taxes from the big promoters. I started at small hall promotion, so I know, it's not as if I'm distant small hall promotion. I know how hard small hall promotion is. You have to go out there, you have to put your posters out there, you have to go around the pub, you drop off 10 tickets there, you drop off 10 tickets there, then you have to go around and check who sold them. And, you have to keep on top of the fighters. And it's crazy, I mean, up until the time I signed Lennox Lewis, I was £100,000 in debt through small hall boxing because I would not give up because I was determined that I would succeed in boxing, or else I would just go completely under.
I mean, you organised amateur contests, you trained fighters. What made you make that jump from being a professional trainer into management and promotion?
I think it was I had a fallout with someone I was working with at the time. We won't say who, but I had a major fallout, and they told me that I'd never work in boxing again. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to show them. And I done it as well because it also helped me in my own personal life. It took my mind off a lot of other things that I was fighting with myself. So boxing to me had been a godsend, but unfortunately, I've been at the bottom, I've been in the middle, I've been at the top, and I've got friends that have struggled to be small hall promoters. I don't care what anyone wants to say, but I worked with a lot of small hall promoters when I had my TV contracts and gave them parts of the promotion. I started boxing back up in Sunderland after a long time since it hadn't been up there in Sunderland. I took boxing to parts of Manchester, which hadn't had it for a while, working with the likes of Steve Woods. I worked with
Phil Jeffries.
Phil Jeffries, no, in Sunderland, yeah. But I forget his name, in Mansfield over that way. I worked in Doncaster. I took my shows on the road and worked with the small hall promoters. And a couple of promoters who are now sort of, we say, just under the big guys, I helped build them and put them there. And it's nice to see that. But I just feel the Board of Control do not look after boxing right. How comes the lower league football teams were able to keep going, were able to play? Money was fed down to them. Maybe not a lot of money, but money was fed down to them to keep them going. They were helped. Even to the government, it shows you what they think. That no money was put into help boxing from the government or the governing body of boxing.
Yeah, it's been horrendous for us. I'm pleased to say that at least the boxing board, once I paid me promoter's license, are extending it until I can put a show on again. But we'll watch this space and see how things are dealt with. It's the COVID situation, of course. We're not allowed to have ringside tables. Well, of course, that's the bread and butter of being able to put big shows on. We sell our ringside tables. The ticket deals that will come in from the smaller fighters tend to cover theirs. And there is a little bit of money, a little bit of bunch to be made when we do it that way. But it's fine margins. And to hear that you were that much in debt back in the day does not surprise me. But it's going to be difficult getting sponsors in as well for small hall promoters. And I know one or two have already decided to call it a day. And what annoys me even more is, I'm not against unlicensed boxing because that was my background. I did 7 years in the unlicensed game before I turned pro. But in my neighborhood, at the weekend, there was an unlicensed show on with 1,000 people in at the venue and 20 fights on and not a sign of COVID restrictions. So, where's the logic in that? It really just doesn't make sense.
Well, where's the logic in letting 60,000 people in to watch a football game, and the British Box Board and Control won't let you have a show? They could let you have shows. A small hall promoter now, I think, because I did look at doing a show and I thought, I'm not going to do this. You've got an extra cost of about $5 to $6 grand because you've got to cover all the COVID testing. You've got to put people in a hotel before the fight. You've got to have this bubble. Where's the logic in that today? We know we've got this virus, but if you come with a negative test, you shouldn't. And you could do some small. I mean, Dennis Hobson done a show just before Christmas in a car park. He must have blown his absolute pants on it, But he's tried to keep going. But Dennis is one of those promoters that is on the verge of knocking on the big time guys. I think they've just started an app, so hopefully he will help a lot of small hall promoters get back into the business.
Yeah, I mean, he's staging an English title fight between one of my fighters, Mccrory, and the English title holder, Samuel Antwi, in September. So fingers crossed that goes ahead. We did put a call out for questions. We've got some great questions for you, Kelly, to be honest. And we'll start with Gordon Woodburn's question, which is, what are Kelly's thoughts on those YouTubers and TikTokers staging what, in my opinion, are pretend money-making boxing matches? We have seen some quite phenomenal figures on YouTube for fights between these reality people. Really, that's all they are. And also, best fighter pound for pound ever, Floyd Mayweather, actually take on one of these people.
Well, I never bought the Floyd Mayweather fight when he fought Conor McGregor. I actually think it's turning boxing, which is a very serious sport, a very serious business, and a dangerous sport, and a dangerous business for the boxer. It's making a mockery of the sport. I do not buy any of the YouTube fights. I do not look at anything other than professional boxing. I think it's I know you can't stop it, but it shouldn't be given publicity. It shouldn't be on the news. I was amazed that Sky News started promoting it and covering it. Sky Sports News were talking about it as well. And I just thought, you're doing a disgrace to boxing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the Conor McGregor thing against Mayweather was bizarre. I mean, it's two completely different sports, and sportsmen fighting each other. But it's all about the money, isn't it, Kelly?
Yeah, unfortunately, money now controls everything. Boxing's always been a money-orientated sport, but now they're finding other ways for boxers or people to make money. It's not even boxing, but to call it boxing. Some of these celebrities, they could. I mean, you could take one of your fighters from your gym, an average, let's say, average journeyman. I don't mean that rudely, but he could go in there and beat half of these celebrities. And what do they get paid? They're lucky if they get £1,000, £2,000, and these guys are walking away with millions for just getting in a ring. It's again, it's a distraction. And you've got the likes of the governing body sanctioning these fights because it's helping the so-called Blazer Brigade and the faceless people we don't see in boxing get a great living and travel around the world expense free.
Yeah, I would agree. Great question, Gordon. Thanks for that. Peter Thompson, he says, "Hi, Steve. Don King once called Kelly a mental midget. How did you manage to annoy Mr. King so much?" He asks.
He actually called me a mental midget and a pugilistic pygmy. It was to do with the Lennox Lewis Tony Tucker fight. Was it Tony? Yeah, it was Tony Tucker fight. Just after it was the rematch. It was ordered by the WC when what's his name threw the belt in the bin, Riddick Bowe.
Yeah,
and they made that the fight for the Lennox was the champion because they bestowed the championship upon him, and we went to purse bids. Don King won the fight with an enormous bid at the time of just over $9.5 million. My company, we bid $8 million, and our American company, they bid $6.5 million because you don't know what's in the bids. When Don King's envelope was opened up, because it was the third one, and I thinking I've won the fight, with an $8 million bid, I nearly fell through the floor. And we negotiated such stringent contracts because we were so worried about Don King pulling so many tricks, which he's quite good at doing. That's where it came from, because we only done what we had to do, and we put a clause in the contract that King could not talk to Lennox Lewis unless I was present or one of the Lennox's team were present. He couldn't even go in the same room as Lennox, And there was an incident where Lennox went in the toilet and Don King followed him in, and we sent security in to remove Don King from the toilet. It was so that's where that comes from.
Great stuff. Keith Roll says, "Please, can you ask Kelly how close was she to making the Lennox Lewis versus Riddick Bowe fight happen in the 90s, and what prevented this fight from happening?"
Rock Newman, Riddick's manager, we agreed to fight. We agreed everything. He kept putting obstacles in the way, and then I think he got beat. So the fight was eventually made, but then Lennox Lewis lost, so the fight never got made. In the end, it was a fight the world wanted. It's very similar to the AJ Tyson Fury fight in a way. It's the fight the world wanted to see. It was definitely a fight we wanted from the Lennox Lewis team. Anyone who says that Lennox ran out, and I can honestly put my hand on my heart and say we done everything to make that fight possible. We flew to New York so many times. We sat in the office with HBO. We conceded so many rights because Lennox was so confident of beating Riddick. He always believed he had that Indian sign over Riddick. Lennox even offered to fight Riddick Bowe for nothing, and I stepped in and stopped. Wouldn't allow that to happen because the fight was worth a lot of money, and you know, it would have been the biggest fight of the era of that time. Unfortunately, it never happened. You know, when Riddick was holding all the ace cards, that's when the fight should have happened. The day he put that belt in the bin, we knew that fight would never happen.
Life Goals says, if Deontay defeats Fury, do you think that scuppers the Fury versus AJ big fight? Life Goals thinks that Fury's ready to retire soon, whereas the other two want to keep going. His dream scenario is that Fury KOs Wilder, AJ KOs Fury, AJ KOs Wilder, and has a long reign as undisputed heavyweight champion, retiring 40-1. What's your thoughts on all of that?
I quite like Tyson Fury as a boxer, not as a person. I think if he dedicates and trains himself, he's very hard to beat. I think he would beat AJ if the fight is made and happened, only if he trains 100% and gets serious, because you never know what Tyson Fury is going to turn up. I think AJ's a good fighter, but not good enough to dominate the heavyweight division like that, unless there's no exceptional fighters out there. It's going to be a very interesting fight in September for AJ. He's coming up against a very classy boxer, very the Russian.
Usyk.
I think that's a very close fight. Maybe the size will help AJ. The fight I would like to see is Joe Joyce and AJ. That would be a great fight.
Yeah, I would agree. It would be. It's going to be interesting again, and it shadows what you were talking about before. These big fights, there's always somebody like yourself back in the day trying to make the fight happen, but it always feels as if there's somebody somewhere trying, to scupper the big fight. And the AJ Fury one is frustrating for me because you want the best fighters to fight each other at their peak. And unfortunately, as we've seen many times, I guess in more recent times, Pacquiao and Mayweather, should have fought each other a lot earlier, but it didn't happen until, Pacquiao was past his best, I felt. But AJ Fury, do you think it happens if they can both win these next two fights? Do you think it'll happen, maybe as early next year?
It's very complicated boxing at the division, because to hold all the belts is very hard. Because I remember the day we beat Holyfield in a rematch and we were the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, Don King went to work to get us stripped because he had the mandatory in the WBA. And within 90 days, if we hadn't signed to fight him, we were stripped. We didn't sign to fight him because there was a much more attractive fights out there for Lennox Lewis at that time. And Lennox Lewis was stripped. You have to get, there's so much politics involved in boxing. You have to get all the sanctioning bodies on board. You have to pay off fighters, to step aside so that you can keep the belts. It's, I think if AJ and Tyson Fury fight, I think straight after that, the fighters will not be able to hold all the belts. I don't think great fights don't need belts. I think, AJ and Tyson Fury do not need the belts. They can throw the belts in the bin. They're still the two best heavyweights out there. Yeah, and that's the problem. There's too many belts out there.
I personally feel Tyson Fury's the technically better fighter. I think AJ, I often felt AJ was a bit of a matchroom manufacture job, if you want my honest opinion. And I was part of that whole roadshow. Me and Phil Jeffries staged the undercard for AJ at the arena when he, before he was even British champion. So we saw it in action. But I like both guys. I've had both of them on as after dinner speakers 2 or 3 times up in the Northeast as well. And I just want to see that fight happen when it should do. It takes me back as well. John McDermott fought Tyson Fury, didn't he?
Beat Tyson Fury. To this day, I will always admit the first fight, the second fight, Fury destroyed John McDermott. I don't know what was happening. John was a very complicated fighter. If John turned up in the right frame of mind, I think John could have beaten anyone in his day. But he was also the most unluckiest fighter. He had so many decisions against Danny Williams, Matt Skelton. I think he won them fights. But to this day, the only person who never fought McDermott beat Fury in the first fight was the referee. And I remember going up to him after and saying, do you know what? Terry O'Connor it was. And I said to him, you should be ashamed of yourself. I said, at least when Dick Turpin robbed people, he put a mask on. You blatantly robbed someone. And I got fined by the British Boxing Board of Control for that comment.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that fight, and I still to this day don't know how John didn't get the decision. But it's not the first time I've watched boxing and thought that it's got to be. I've got to be honest, which I guess leads us to one of my questions, which is, you know, I think a lot of us fans do often feel that some of these bigger fights are fixed. It feels like they're fixed. You know, have you ever seen anything in your time which would you know give the fans, you know, some kind of answer to that? Do you think some of these are the mob, of course, back in the heyday, in the days of Frank Sinatra, etc., were often accused of running boxing.
Well, boxing's a romantic sport, isn't it, as well? Because
Yeah.
it's a sport where, like, let's remember, I was a 15-year-old kid from Peckham that walked out of school without any qualifications. I became one of the world's leading boxing promoters and managers. You know, that couldn't happen in industry. You know, so there's a certain romance about boxing, and people love to think that people involved in boxing are villains. The amount of times that I was told that I was a villain and I was funded by villains, you know, and it used to make me laugh. I've never, you know, obviously reading back the Sonny Liston days, they all say the mafia were involved in the Liston alley fights. Yet no one's ever produced 100% proof. I've never come across it in my time, and you know, I've boxed at the highest levels where you would want. But I've sometimes thought some of the judges might be a little bit biased towards a certain fighter, not purposely, but they might just have and also television companies. I feared a couple of fights for Lennox Lewis that we had in New York because I felt the American public and the American TV company would like to have seen Lennox get beat. You know, and they kept pushing fights into us to try and get us beat. You know, some they made terrible mistakes on. The one that I think they all thought they were going to get was Michael Grant. But as soon as that fight was made, I said, Lennox Lewis knocks this guy out within 1 round, 2 rounds, which he did do. You know, it was one of the easiest fights of Lennox's career. Yet HBO were hyping Michael Grant up to be some kind of superstar. But, you know, you've got to look at things in perspective. You know, Lennox Lewis was a rounded fighter, schooled by some of the best. His Olympic pedigree show that, you know, he didn't just fight for the title. Like AJ won the title against a very nobody. You know, Lennox Lewis, we fought Gary Mason on the way up. We fought Shanay on the way up. We fought Mike Weaver. You know, we fought some good fighters, Ray Mercer. You know, what's probably is the case with boxing in the stage is the clever matchmaking. I think, like, Joe Joyce's fight on Saturday was a lovely fight, but what clever matchmaking by Frank Warren, who I think is still, now that I've left the game, the best at matchmaking in it.
Yeah,
and moving fighters.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, he's you know, he's been there, you know, been around the game for years, got the T-shirt, and hell of a story. I guess sitting back at home in that 15-month period has been a great opportunity to watch some of the fantastic boxing documentaries, and I'm a big fan of Sky documentaries. Watched a few of them on there. The Lennox Lewis one was fantastic, and I watched the Frank Warren one recently as well, which was great.
I didn't know there was a Frank Warren one. What's that called? I'll have to watch that.
It was on BBC. So you might be able to catch it on iPlayer, just about his time in the boxing game. I'll send you the link to it.
Please do, yeah.
If I can find it. But it was fantastic. It was fantastic to watch Frank Warren, where he came from, and some of the stories about his early career. But with regards to the Lennox Lewis one, I'd forgotten some of those fights. And I mean, you mentioned some of the names that Lennox fought. Which was your favorite fight? You know, when you were managing Lennox?
I liked Shannon Briggs and Ray Mercer. They were two of the fights that Lennox had to prove beyond all doubt that he was a good fighter. He had to dig deep, especially Ray Mercer. And Shannon Briggs was like a shootout at the OK Corral in Atlantic City. You know, They were great. And Tyro Biggs was a good fight because Tyro Biggs had beaten Lennox in the first Olympics when Lennox was a young lad and he fancied the fight. Some fights you'd go into not worried about. I would think, oh, these are good fights for Lennox. It's quite easy. When Lennox lost to McCall, I was hesitant about that, not because of McCall, but because of the way things went wrong in Lennox's training camp, and there was a lot of dispute in that camp. Unfortunately, that documentary didn't cover every aspect of Lennox's career. It could have been a lot more juicier, but it was a very good documentary. But certain things and certain people were left out of that documentary that should have been included to show some of the struggles. So hopefully it might show in the one that's coming out about me in end of this year.
Yeah. Look forward to that. I enjoyed the two Evander Holyfield fights. I mean, Holyfield was always a bit of a warrior for me. And I've got to be honest, I always felt at the time that Holyfield was really going to cause Lennox a few problems. But, and of course, in the first fight, he did.
Well, no, I actually think Lennox Lewis won the first fight clearly, though the draw was given, which was a very... I actually think if Holyfield had been given the decision in the second fight, I wouldn't have moaned. I think Holyfield, I think the judges, because of what happened and because of the outcry in the first fight, the judges favoured Lennox a bit too much in the second fight.
Yeah. Great fight. And I think I think when you look at his record and the fighters that he took on, he didn't dodge anybody. I think, some fighters tend not to fight the people at the right time. My opinion, of course, not everyone's opinion. I always felt Joe Calzaghe had a good run. He was managed properly, but he fought all the big names, but fought a lot of them when they were just past their best. He didn't fight
Well, that's what I'm talking about, clever matchmaking.
Yeah.
There was one fight I took to Lennox, and Lennox would not fight that fight. I won't say who it was. And I said to Lennox, why? And Lennox went, at this stage of my career, that fight's not it's not a fight I want, and it's a dangerous fight. I to this day believe Lennox would have beaten that fight, and I thought it was at the right time of his career. But, Lennox didn't want the fight, and at the end of the day, you have to go with the fighter. I mean, I made a mistake with the David Price fight with Tony Thompson, the first one, and I was adamant we should never have had the rematch, and I never sanctioned the rematch. It was Price who insisted on it and his lawyer, and I told them not to take that fight, and that was when I decided I was going to walk from boxing, because I felt lawyers were having too much more power over people that knew the boxing business.
Yeah, I would agree. Mike Tyson, of course, was somebody who, made so much hype in that era. And Lennox did finally get a chance to fight Mike Tyson.
But that's a fight, going back to what you said, would have been great to see Mike Tyson in his prime fight Lennox Lewis's prime, because they were two good fighters and very different in style and very different in height. You got to remember when Tyson fought Lennox Lewis, he was going downhill. He was on drugs to keep him sane because he was quite crazy, man. It was a shame because the one thing that I respect about Lennox Lewis is he walks away from the game at the top and has never come back. And also I do that with Joe Calzaghe. I hate it when I see fighters that come back when they've been at the top, they've walked away and they come back. They're either craving for that one big payday, or they miss the admiration of the boxing fans, or they can't adjust to life without that sort of circus around them. So for me, I think Lennox Lewis and Joe Calzaghe are two great role models, and also the late Marvin Hagler.
Yeah, again, another great fighter. Two other fights I want to talk about with Lennox. One was early on in his career, and that was Glenn Mccrory, of course. I'm from Newcastle. Took on Glenn.
I remember that fight.
Do you remember that fight? Yeah, I was just going to say, what's your memories of that night?
At the Albert Hall. I'm a very good friend of Glenn, so I'm never going to say nothing bad about Glenn. But it was like a monster against a schoolboy. You had a light heavyweight a cruiserweight champion fighting a fully fledged heavyweight. You know, Glenn was a good fighter in his weight, but he wasn't able to deal with the size of Lennox Lewis and the punching power of Lennox Lewis. But he negotiated a good deal for himself, so I was glad about that.
And the other fight, of course, against somebody who was Britain's favourite, Frank Bruno.
Yes, that fight. I was really pleased to make that fight because that was one fight. Again, that at the time that would have been equivalent to the AJ Fury fight. That was the first $1 million fight on the ordinary television. £1 million. I got £1 million TV rights for that fight. It was the first ever £1 million fight because pay-per-view wasn't up and running at that time. And it was, but I don't know why Sky didn't want to go with pay-per-view on that one. I think they were trying to promote that, so they paid well over they paid great money for that fight. I took that fight to Cardiff. People said I was crazy, but I took that fight to Cardiff for the reason that I felt if we went to London, the fan base would be too pro Frank Bruno because Frank was the darling of the whole of London, and he had the great promoter Mickey Duff in his corner who had big, knew how to sell tickets in London. So I felt by taking the fight out of London, it made it much more even in Lennox. Not that I doubted Lennox would ever lose, but I just felt the fan base may influence people. And you know what I will say, in fairness, Frank Bruno was doing a great fight up until he got caught in, was it round 5 or 6? He got caught round 6 or 7. I can't remember with the famous left hook from Lennox Lewis. But Lennox was ill that night. Should never have gone in the ring. I tried to talk him out of going in the ring, but he insisted that he was all right and he could beat Frank Bruno with one hand tied behind his back. But, Frank was doing well till he got caught. And I think you're going to find that's going to happen with AJ. Well, I think it did. It showed in the Ruiz's fight when he got caught. Everything goes out the window, the coordination and everything else. They do not know how to cover up or protect themselves. Well, so it's a very interesting situation. But the Bruno Lewis fight, I think, was a great fight for British boxing at the time. But I think a better one, but it was because it wasn't for a world title, didn't get the recognition, was Lennox Lewis and Gary Mason for the British, Commonwealth and European title.
Yeah, I remember that. I've had a couple of good nights out with Gary Mason, actually. God bless him.
Gary was a lovely guy. And you know what? That's when I realised Mickey Duff was beginning to lose it, because Gary Mason was number 3 in the world. Lennox Lewis was only coming up to his 12th pro fight, I think. And there was no reason why Gary Mason should have taken that fight. A couple more fights, he would have been number 1. And when the fight was made, I sat at a press conference and I said, Mickey, I have to be honest, I think you've made the biggest mistake in your life. And he turned around and said to me, what do you know about boxing? You're just an upstart. Well, we got it. We won. And unfortunately, Gary, from that moment on, his career was gone. Because Lennox destroyed his eye, didn't he? Because that was our plan. We knew he had a weak eye and was to constantly work. I mean, the trainer at the time, John Davenport, made Lennox constantly work, non-stop jabbing for the eye.
Yeah. That's it. It's a brutal sport, boxing, and if you find a weakness, you've got to try and utilize.
Well, that's the beauty of having real good trainers. They study the opponent, they find the weaknesses, and then they design the plan to work to that weakness. That's another thing. Today I think there's too many trainers who are not boxing trainers. But again, I'm not going to go down that road because I don't want to start an argument and get lynched on Twitter.
Yeah, it's certainly a place for that. Life Goals also asks, do you think Klitschko versus Klitschko would have smashed all the box office records if they'd agreed to fight in their prime?
I don't think they would ever agree to fight, so I can't comment on that because they're two brothers. Why would they fight each other? They dominated the heavyweight division between them for a long time. They were good fighters. They were good fighters, but they were boring fighters. They did not pull the crowd. They did not have that again, a bit like Lennox Lewis. You know, Lennox was a great fighter, but he missed. He didn't have that sort of magic that you need to pull the crowd, if you know what I mean. You know, you might have seen it in his documentary. Lennox life was very calm, very smooth, and he never caused controversy except for the Tyson press conference. But it was Tyson that caused it, not Lennox Lewis. You know, I would love Lennox Lewis to have had a bit of Ricky Hatton in him. He would have been the best machine to work with, because Ricky had that appeal to the public.
Yeah, I would agree again with that.
Well, Frank Bruno had it, didn't he? I mean,
yeah.
When you think, you know, Frank Bruno was probably up. You know, how many times he fought Witherspoon? He fought Tyson. He fought Lennox. I think he fought 5 times before he won the title, didn't he? The world title. And it was his crowd appeal that kept him there.
Yeah, that's right. Got another question from Gary Young. Gary says, where would you put Lennox in a list of the current heavyweights, such as AJ, Joyce, Wilder, Fury, and Ruiz? I think he beats them all, says Gary.
I have to agree with Gary. I think the nearest one I've seen to Lennox Lewis is Joe Joyce, because I'm a great believer. If you haven't got a jab, you can't be a great fighter. And Joe Joyce has got a fantastic jab, and that was the secret. Lennox Lewis had a knockout jab, and Joe Joyce has got it. You know, I learned my career under some of the greatest names in boxing. I'll throw one into the mix: Ernie Fozzy. And Ernie used to go to me, like, I'd be in the gym, he'd come in, and he'd always have something. He'd have like a cocktail to his mouth, and he'd be chewing it, and he'd go, "Get rid of him." I go, "But what?" He go, "He can't fucking jab. If you can't jab, there's no point in even working with him." You know, everything comes off of the jab, and it's you know, Lennox had one of the best jabs in boxing. Joe Joyce has got a great jab, like solid and powerful. They know how to use it. They use it soft, and then also use it like a ramrod rod, and then come through with the killer punch. So I have to agree. I would put Lennox way, but you can only judge boxers in the time they were in their era. So, you know, today's group are the best around in their era. They're great fighters. Would they have been as good with Lennox Lewis, Evander Holyfield, Riddick Bowe, Ray Mercer? You know, there were some great fighters there that never even fought for world titles, or even got the chance, or became champions, because there was, in them days, there were some real good heavyweights around.
Julian asks a question: should there be a transgender category in the sport?
I don't get involved in that, so you know, there's not enough transgender people to have a category. So
yeah, no problem. With regards to the amateur, I guess, what do you think there should be more of a combination? And this is a question from me, between the amateur and the pro game. I've found in my time that there's a big distance between them. The amateurs are very set to in their ways, and I often think that the jump from the amateur to the pro could be easier if the two work together.
I actually agree with that. I would like to see, like in football, an apprentice professional boxer that maybe fight 4 rounds and they may get paid 60, 70, I'm just using them figures, or a couple of £100, and they go on like pro cards and they learn their career. It would be great to see something like that. Because now I'm not sure, is it, if you've had less than 3 pro fights, or is it 4, you can actually enter the Olympic Games?
Yeah.
But again, they've taken, in the Olympic Games, unfortunately, they've destroyed it, because the Olympic Games was once the most purest of all sports and events, because it was pure amateurs. Now you've got professional tennis players, professional golf players, footballers in there. They've taken away the chance of people to dream about winning a medal for their country through being an amateur sports person.
Yeah, a lot needs to be done, I think, between those two levels. And, I'd like to see there be more of a combination. Obviously, we're watching the Olympics now. It's expected that, we'll see a few of these Olympians potentially turn over pro. Is there anybody who you've seen maybe in fighting for GB that excites you? The McCormack brothers are certainly making a bit of a buzz up in the Northeast at the moment.
I must be honest, I don't follow boxing as much as I used to now. I look at fights like I wanted to watch Joe Joyce on Saturday, so I watch it. I'm not really. I couldn't even name any British champions, to be honest. Well, I know Joe Joyce is the heavyweight champion. I've watched Josh Taylor. I use Colin Frampton, Josh Warrington, but other than that, I don't really follow a lot of boxing.
Is it
I still look at the heavyweight division because that's what I sort of always like.
Is it something you're hoping to get involved in? I know in the past few years there was talk of you coming back potentially as a promoter or stuff. Is that something which you would consider doing?
No, I work with one female fighter at the moment, and I'm happy doing that. It's more of a hobby. I don't want to come back. I don't want to promote. I've had my time. You have to know when you've had your time. I think if I came back, I'd be like the fighter that doesn't know it's time to call it a day. I always made my mind up. I wanted to walk away, and I walked away because of a lot of personal problems as well. I maybe could have stayed for a couple of more years if I could have battled what I was going through and not afraid to come out in the boxing world. But I've walked away from it now. I've been away from it now since 2013 at that level. And if I'm honest, I don't miss it. I don't miss the cutthroat. I don't miss the people. I think the people that I grew up with in boxing has changed. In my days, you could do a deal, shake someone's hand, and that deal was done. Today, that doesn't happen, and there are still some people in the game that I've got a lot of respect for. Phil Jeffries, yourself, John Pegg in the Midlands, Tommy Owen, the promoter down there, the guys that I went to Spain with the other week, the Irish guys, Leonard and Steve. These guys are, to me, but there are no real, other than them sort of people, the new generation of people in boxing are not boxing people. There are certain promoters, in boxing who have got no idea about boxing. They're purely there because the money's great, and they don't know how to look after fighters the way they should be looked after. They don't maneuver fighters in the right way. It's all about the dollar sign. And if a fighter gets beat, he falls off the conveyor belt, a new one goes on the conveyor belt.
Yeah, very true. Mick Lowes just wanted to pass on his best, and Mick is a top broadcaster. Used to work on Capital Radio, and he said he did Lennox Lewis's first ever interview in Great Britain at Capital Radio the night that you flew in from Canada.
That's right. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so he just wanted to pass on his best. I want to ask you who your favourite fighter has been of all time, Kelly.
Roberto Duran.
Did you ever get a chance to see Roberto fight live?
I actually brought Roberto to the UK for the first time ever on a promotional tour, 2-week promotional tour. I went around his house in Miami, and I remember having to climb over this wall to get there because he lived behind this in this complex. And I knocked on the front door. It was crazy, but yeah, I have a lot of respect for Roberto Duran. I love watching his fights, and another fighter I used to like was Carlos Palomino, the one that beat John H. Stracey way back in. And there's some fighters out there. I've got great respect for Larry Holmes. I think Larry Holmes is one of the most underrated heavyweights of all time. He had one of the best jabs I've ever seen on a heavyweight fighter or any fighter. Carlos Monzo was another great fighter, the Argentinian middleweight, till he threw his wife off the balcony and got life in prison.
Yeah, very interesting case. I remember that as well. Is there a favourite fight? Not necessarily one where you've been, the manager or the promoter. It could be, of course, but is there a favourite fight that you have watched in your time?
Yep, it was Roberto Duran when he was a young man. I forgot that. In the car park in Panama. That's when I fell in love with Roberto Duran. I advised people to watch it. I forgot what it was. I think Roberto was about 18 or 19. Oh, and I was at the Tommy Hearns Marvin Hagler fight before. That was a blast there, yes. Yeah.
You mentioned social media earlier, saying you didn't want to get into a spat on Twitter. How do you think, how important do you think social media is to boxing these days? I mean, we've seen, big name fighters like Tyson Fury embrace it, whether it's, Instagram
well, you know
or
what?
Twitter.
I'm not going to say what, but I can tell you a story about a fighter who went to sign pro with a certain promoter, and they actually asked him how many followers he had on social media.
No way.
So that shows you how important it is.
Yeah, because it is huge. I mean, Joe Law is in the Northeast. Not the greatest boxer to come out the Northeast, but boy, he sells tickets, and his social media following is huge. And he calls this one out and he calls that one out, and that in itself is I guess shows boxing has changed a lot. And that's how you say. But the whole premise is still putting bums on seat and selling tickets, and it's down to the boxer.
Yep, that's the most important thing. I remember when social media first came out, it wasn't around at the time when Lennox Lewis was fighting. It just started to come out towards the end, I believe. And I had to reorganize all my office because the people in my office had no idea about social media or the internet. And I had to bring in all new young guys that knew about that and to keep me going. And I think that's what prolonged my career a bit longer. And Bob Arum's done the same thing, the great promoter in America. Frank Warren done the same thing. Social media is, unfortunately, not just boxing, a very important part of our life in a good and bad way, unfortunately.
Got to talk a little bit about the boxing bin man as well. Randall Monroe, memories of Randall.
One of my favourite fighters, because Randall was on my card. He was fighting a fighter from Manchester that I managed, who was destined to be a great fight, a triple ABA champion and everything else. And Randall put up such a great show. I went over after and I spoke to the Shinfields, and I went, he's not a bad fighter. And they went, we just can't get any fights. We only take fights like we've had to take this one. And, I went, I'd love to sign him to a promotional contract. And from that moment onwards, it was just like, and I went, what's he doing for a living? They said, he's a dustbin man. I went, right, get him walking in the ring with a yellow visor on, give them out to all his fans, and he's going to walk into my old man's a dustman. And it just took off. And, his career was great. He ended up fighting for the WBC World Championship in Tokyo, where he went the distance with at the time, probably the best bantamweight around at that time, the Japanese suits. Yep, and I'm glad to say I'm still friends with Randall, and we, every so often chat on social media, and we bumped into each other a couple of times at functions. So, I've got a hell of a lot of respect for Randall Monroe. I think he could have been a footballer as well as a boxer.
Yeah,
he was on Leicester in his early part of his career.
Oh, fantastic. I didn't know that. Talking about football, obviously a lot of the shows on my podcast are about Newcastle United. Are you still following Millwall's ups and downs?
I'm a fanatical Millwall supporter. Here in Portugal, when I'm here, I can see every game. And I actually do follow Newcastle because I quite like Steve Bruce. That's probably going to upset a lot of you people up in Newcastle.
Yes.
I think he's doing a good job with what he's able to work with.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also think, another team. We were talking football today. I love talking sport. I love talking boxing. I love talking football. Any sport that I sort of like, I love. And we were talking about football today, and we were talking about Crystal Palace. You know, though they've made a brave move in appointing Patrick Vieira, them Palace fans who think now they want to be careful. Roy Hodgson may have been a bit of an old stuck in the mud, played dull football, but look how long he kept Crystal Palace in the Premiership.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes the grass always looked greener on the other side. You know, obviously I know Roy had, because of his age, was obviously coming to the end of his life, you know, but I think Roy was a great manager. You know, and you see it quite a lot. You know, I think next year's going to be an interesting year in the Premiership.
Yeah.
You know, look what Everton doesn't guarantee him success because they've got Benitez there as their manager. And look at West Ham. I mean, a while ago, the West Ham fans hated David Moyes. Last year, he was like a hero when he came back to them when they were struggling for a manager. Look, they finished just outside of the top 6, didn't they? But
yeah,
will he do that again next year? Football's going to be interesting next year.
I'm going to tip Palace to go down because of the players that they've lost, and bringing Vieira in as manager. I think that's a big gamble. But Newcastle getting onto the Steve Bruce situation. It's the owner we don't like, and we can't get rid of him at this moment in time because the Premier League aren't allowing the Saudi takeover. What do you think about that? I mean, we're allowed to put boxing on. I was just going to mention about that. Yeah, we're allowed to put boxing on in Saudi.
Hasn't that been put off sometime? Isn't there a woman that's involved in this consortium? But it's going to arbitration, but they've made a date for next year sometime.
Amanda Staveley from PCP is trying to facilitate the deal, but arbitration is being put back to next year. But there's a cat case coming into play now, which they reckon will happen prior to the arbitration. Now, this means that there could be disclosure of evidence come out in the cat case. So I guess the key is whether the cat case happens before the arbitration.
And is this against the current owners of the ground or against the
Premier League?
Against the Premier League.
Yeah. And also they're having some kind of dispute now with Man City over something else, which they've tried to sweep under the carpet. I mean, this could be big. This could be big for the Premier League, because if there can be any way, shape or form prove that there's a cartel running English football, the government by law have to get involved. So we could be witnessing the biggest shake-up in football, since its formation, I guess, of the Premier League back in the early 90s.
Well, I think cartels do run sport. I think there was a cartel in boxing. You know, you can't tell me the way Sky done the deal with Barry with the Matchroom was, and I've got to be very careful because I don't want to get sued.
No,
was good for boxing. You know, it formed, very much like in the early days when Frank Warren had the exclusive contract. It's not good for boxing. When Sky opened up boxing and they had me there, they had Frank Warren there, they had Ricky Hatton there, you got better competitive fights because we were working against each other to keep our contracts. When you got someone who's got an exclusive contract and they know they're safe, they can do it. They can build monsters.
Yeah, no, they definitely can. Be interesting to see what happens with regards to the football. Last 5 minutes, has boxing fallen behind MMA, do you think?
I don't follow MMA, so I think boxing is a unique sport. I think you're always going. Boxing is the most successful sport on pay-per-view television. That I get. That I know. It's the only one that really works if you've got the right fight. So it depends on the fan. It's at the fan base. Bob Arum once said, boxing in America, because it has lost the white middle class fans, the US, Ultimate Fighting, what's it, and to the MMA. Damien White? Yeah. And they said that was one of the problems, and he went looking for new markets. That's when he started promoting the Mexican market very big. And promoters are always looking for new markets. At the moment, Britain's very lucky because we have a great batch of young of heavyweights, young or old, whatever you want to say. You know, they met. You can throw Dillian White in that mix as well. You know, he's a good, decent heavyweight. So Britain's got some good heavyweights. Boxing is only as good as the heavyweight division.
Yeah, I would agree. The last two questions I'm going to ask you. Have you got a favourite boxing film, Kelly?
I like Someone Out There Likes Me. But I'm also a fanatic on all the... I love watching the Rocky films, and I watch them from one to the final one with Tony Bellew in it. I just love the Rocky films as well. But if I have to pick a classic, it's Someone Up There Likes Me.
Yeah, been some cracking ones over the years. Raging Bull's still one of my favourites, I guess.
Raging Bull's another good one. There's also a very good one out there called, is it not, about Vinny Pazienza?
Yes, yeah. I haven't seen it yet. But
no,
yeah.
I haven't seen it, but I've seen trailers of it. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, very difficult to recreate a fight scene, but I think Rocky always managed to do that. And of course, it's one of those films. If you catch it on TV, even if it's halfway through, you end up watching it all the way through to the end.
Rocky. Yeah, it's great. Sylvester Stallone plays it to a T, you know. And the last one was even good. I mean, when he came back with what's his name, son, who fought Tony Bellew, you know. And Bellew played a great role in it. You know, I mean, I thoroughly enjoy it. If I know they're coming on, I can sit and watch them. If you put them on at 5 o'clock and you show everyone, I will sit and watch them all through. Yeah,
me too. Okay, you've done reality TV. You did Big Brother. You've done Celebrity MasterChef. Are we likely to see you with Ant and Dec in the jungle, or do you fancy Strictly? Is there anything else that you fancy doing along those lines?
I've just signed to have my life story made into a feature film. Yeah. But I'm just finishing up a 5-part documentary that's been made about my life. Other than that, no. I've now decided to live a very quiet life here in the Algarve, away from everybody and away from publicity, and just concentrate on sort of helping the LGBT community through diversity speaking, and not just the LGBT community, but helping people from minority groups. Because at the end of the day, we're all human beings. It doesn't matter the colour of your skin, your religion, your sexuality, your gender, your nationality. We all come in this world the same way, and we're all leaving it the same way in that wooden box. So I wish we could all just learn to respect each other and just get on with life. And, you know, maybe not, some people may never accept or understand what I've done, but what no one has is the right to deny my existence or anyone else's existence from outside what people would call the norm in society.
Yeah, great message, Kelly. Fantastic message, and I'm sure it's one that all of our viewers will concur with. Can you just let us know, when do you expect to see the 5-parter come out, and where will people be able to see it?
I believe it's going to be released. We're working out which will be the last episode, and they would like it to be me at a boxing event with my fighter Kathy McMahon, the Irish girl. They were hoping that would have been completed in Spain, but unfortunately her opponent never turned up. So once that will probably be it. I think it will be around about September, October time of this year.
Fantastic. Well, best of luck with that. Have you got a message for anybody watching?
No, just listen. You've got one life, live it to the full and enjoy it, and just respect each other as human beings. And a smile goes a long way.
Fantastic. Kellie Maloney, thank you very much for your time. Been an absolute pleasure speaking to you.
Thanks, Steve.